In this lesson, we're going to learn about language and communication as a specific part of culture and cultural diversity. In today's class, we're going to get at a definition of what language is, how language originated in humans. We're going to talk about linguistic diversity, how many languages are in the world, what's happening to them. And then we're going to talk about how language relates to culture and how it relates to social relationships among people. First thing is to define what we mean by language. Now, language, we think of it as one of those defining characteristics of what it means to be a human. Language, is a form of communication that's unique to humans as far as we know, and that it is necessary for culture. You cannot have human culture if we didn't have the ability for human language. Now, what does communication mean? Well, communication is a form of interaction between people where a message is transmitted. When I speak, I have a message and it's carried over to those who listen to me and they understand the message. Communication is broad. It doesn't have to be only language. It includes things like, yes, our spoken language, but also our body language, how we sit, how we stand, how we move our body, our facial expressions, right? Facial gestures. It also includes animal communication. Animals, all kinds of animals communicate, but they don't have language per se. What do we mean by that? What are some examples of the ways in which other animals communicate? Well, we know that bees do different dances, right? A bee will come to the beehive and do a little dance, and that dance is explaining to the other bees how to reach, for example, a patch of flowers. Ants communicate through pheromones, right? These substances that they emit, and this is why we always see ants walking in a trail in a straight line, because they're smelling each other, and that's how they follow each other and communicate with each other. Dolphins communicate using different vocal sound or different sounds. Now, our closer relatives in the animal world, which are other non-human primates, they use vocal systems of communication like we do, right? They have apparatus in their upper bodies where they can emit sounds through their mouths. However, this communication is very different from ours because although they use their mouths to emit this sound, the number of sounds that they can emit is very limited. Humans have an unlimited ability to produce different sounds. Now, every individual language only uses a small number of different sounds, but we could make a lot more. And other primates, when they communicate, they're responding to a specific stimuli. Unlike humans, other primates are not going to sit there and just have a philosophical conversation about the meaning of life. It doesn't work like that, right? If there is a danger approaching, like a hunter, they'll emit a certain sound. If they spot food that they can eat, they have a different sound. It's very limited. Now, one example is the gorilla from the picture. Unfortunately, she passed away already, but Coco is a very famous gorilla, and I posted a video for you to watch. She was studied for decades by Penny, her caretaker, and Coco was able to learn sign language. Now, sign language is true human language, but it's used the hands are used to communicate, right? When somebody cannot emit the proper vocal sounds. However, even though Coco learned human sign language, she learned a very limited part of that language. And most importantly, there is no cultural transmission. A human had to teach Coco, and Coco was unable to teach other gorillas this language. Therefore, it's not the same as humans. One important characteristic is that language is symbolic. If you remember in the second unit, when we talk about culture, we also say that culture is symbolic, right? In what way is language symbolic? Well, I have a picture here of an animal, right? This is a real animal. And in Spanish, we call this animal perro. However, this word perro is symbolic. There is no reason why this living animal has to be called perro, right? This is just a word that people who speak a specific language called Spanish, right, use. And anytime somebody emits this sound from their mouths, perro, we know they're referring to this animal. However, that's just one language, right? We could call this animal anything as long as we agree that this is what we're going to call it, right? And this is why the word for this animal is also dog, right? In English, or chien in French, inu in Japanese, sobaka in Russian, kukur in Hindi, cho in Vietnamese, right? All these languages are correct, right? All these different words refer to the same animal, right? Because language is symbolic. There is no relationship between those words and that animal, except that a community of people who speak each language agrees what sound is going to refer to that animal. Language also allows for something that we call productivity. Now, productivity is the ability to create new expressions that other people can comprehend. As humans, we don't just repeat the same words that other people have told us in the same order. As long as we follow certain rules, right, of language use, we can mix them and create new expressions, say something different. For example, if I tell you, tomorrow I am going to eat a hot dog while swimming at the pool in Sagrado, this is a sentence I have never in my life said before, right? I produced a new sentence because my, human language allows me to do so. Now, Coco actually exhibited some ability for this characteristic of language. She was gifted a ring for her finger, and she had never been taught that word, but she knew the word for bracelet and she knew the word for finger. So she used her very smart gorilla brain and combined them and said, finger bracelet. This is a finger bracelet. Language also allows for something we call displacement. Displacement is the ability to refer to things or events that are not present in the moment, and even hypothetical things. Okay, I'm going to give you some examples. If I tell you tomorrow we can fish in the river on that other valley, right? I'm not talking about a river that I can see right now in front of me, or a valley that's right now in the present, or fish that I can see right now. Language is allowing me to talk about something in the future that I can't see right now, but I know that it's there. Or hypotheticals. What would happen if? What would happen if we go to war with this country? What would happen if we create this law in our country versus another law, right? Displacement, therefore, is very useful, and it gave humans a huge adaptive advantage, right? Because we can say these things, we can plan things as humans. Displacement also allows us to lie, however, right? A gorilla can't lie because it can't tell you there is something in front of you if it's not there, because you would know it's not true. But humans, because I can talk about things that are not in front of us right now, if I tell you, yesterday I went to Disney World, you don't know if it's true or not because you weren't there. But language allows me to say that. Coke actually also expressed something that showed some limited capacity for displacement. She had bitten Penny, her trainer, and 3 days later, she expressed sadness about biting Penny, right? She was able to say that she was sad about something that had happened in the past, that was not happening in the moment. Okay, so now that we know what language is and a few of the characteristics of language, let's talk about how did we acquire language as humans, right? There are some theories about the evolution of language in humans. Okay, the first one is that we know that language developed over hundreds of thousands of years. This is not something that humans acquire in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 generations. It took a very long time. And language developed because we began to combine these vocal noises that our bodies and brains allow us to make, right? And as I mentioned, language became very important for humans because we quickly realized that it offered us a lot of adaptive advantages, right? Unlike other primates, we don't just make a sound, right? Say words when there's danger present and or food present. We can combine all these vocal sounds to say things like, hey, there is danger here, right? Maybe it's an animal, maybe it's a group of enemies, maybe it's, I don't know, an avalanche that's coming. But if we manage to survive the danger in this way, then we can move to this other place to secure food, right? Being able to combine these sounds, right? These words now, in a way that we can all understand was very useful for humans. It really was critical in our survival. Now, hands are also thought to have been very important in the evolution of human language. Because human hands are very useful, right? There's a theory that at some point in our history, we mainly used manual gestures to communicate. Of course, we still use them, right? But because we have these opposable thumbs. Now, human hands are special. Not very many animals have this, but some do. Our thumbs can touch each of the other fingers, okay? Not all animals can do this. Dogs cannot do this, right? So this allows us to grab things, and it allows us to grab things in two different ways. If you look at the picture, there's the power grip. If we grab things this way, we can put a lot of force behind it because our arm muscles are behind that, that movement. Or if we grab things with our fingers, well, our fingers are not very strong, but they can help us do things very precisely, right? So this theory says that as humans realized that our hands were more useful as tools, right, that we began to rely more on these vocal sounds until little by little it grew into a full language. Now, let's talk about language diversity, right, and how it is at risk. Okay, language diversity is wide and it is variable. Okay, what does this mean? It means there are approximately 6,000 different languages in the world today. And how do we define what a language is? We say that a language ends and another one begins when those two people cannot understand each other. This is called mutual unintelligibility. For example, we speak Spanish in Puerto Rico, but really I would argue we speak Puerto Rican Spanish. We have certain words that are unique to Puerto Rico, a certain accent that most people here have, and we know that people in Spain also speak Spanish, but their accent is very different. Some vocabulary is different, and same thing with Mexican Spanish and Chilean Spanish. And sometimes it's even a little bit difficult to get used to their accent, but we understand each other, right? There are all these variations of Spanish, but we get it. We all understand each other, and so we all just speak Spanish. That's not the same thing, right? If I hear somebody speaking Mandarin or Ojibwa or Greek or any of the other 6,000 languages, right? That's clearly a different language. The size of the linguistic community also varies drastically. 95 people, 95% of people in the world today speak fewer than 100 languages. So it's impressive to say there are 6,000 languages in the world, but really the majority of humans only speak one of 100 languages. Of course, languages like Mandarin, English, Spanish, French, they're all in that list. That means that 5% of the population speaks over, thousands of languages. There are thousands of languages that only a small number of people still speak them. And this is the problem of language extinction, right? There are some languages that only 5 humans are left who speak it. And when those people die, the language is extinct. You have an assignment where we're going to learn about why this happens. Or languages are also grouped into what we call families. Linguistic or language families are comprised of all the languages that derive from a common proto-language. Because you know now that language evolved under over hundreds of thousands of years, that means there are some very old languages that we don't speak anymore, but we speak languages that came from those older proto-languages. So here is an example. Here is Spanish. We speak Spanish in the present, right? But French, Spanish, Italian, Catalan, Portuguese, Occitan, Romanian, and Romansh. These are all European languages that are actually fairly similar to each other. Why is that? Because they all derived from a Roman Latin language, right? No society, people can learn classical Latin, but no society in the world today speaks Latin. However, in many countries in the world, we speak one of these languages that evolved from classical Latin. Similarly, English, Dutch, German, Swedish, Norwegian, Danish, Afrikaans, Frisian, Icelandic, many other languages here came from an older Germanic language. Russian and its relative languages came from an older, what we call Baltic Slavic language. Irish, Scottish, Welsh, Breton, Cornish, these are European languages, all derived from an older Celtic language, and so on and so forth. Even the languages of India today, Hindi, Urdu, Bengali, and countries like Iran, Farsi, Pashto, Kurdish, Tajiki, right? That huge area in Asia, they all derived from an older Indo-Iranian language. And all of these languages came from an even older language that all these regions spoke about 5,000 years before Christ. So about 7,000 years ago, all these languages did not exist. They all came from a language that we call Proto-Indo-European language. Therefore, this is the Indo-European language family. And we can see this all over the world. Here is one language family called the Afro-Asiatic family, right? That from this older Afro-Asiatic language, all these other languages were derived, and all of these eventually led to other languages, and the modern languages that came from this older proto-language are Egyptian, Yemeni, Arabic, Diné, Gonga, Iraqi, Erde, Hausa, all these languages here that are spoken where? In parts of the Middle East, Northern Africa. Okay. Fourth topic is the relationship between language and culture. This is a relationship that happens in both ways. First of all, always reflect culture, right? Languages reflect what we call cultural emphasis. This means that the vocabulary in a language emphasizes the concepts that are important in that culture. Let's see some examples. Okay, first of all, in the country of Sudan in north central Africa, right, there is a group of people called the Nur, okay, and you learn about these people later, but for now you have to know that in their economy, right, in their livelihoods, cows are really important. Cows give them, nutrition. Cows are a symbol of wealth. Cows are just central to the life of these people culturally. Therefore, it is not a surprise that they have a lot of vocabulary to refer to cows, different types of cows, uh, different parts of cows, more language around cows that somebody like me has who knows a couple of things about cows, but cows are not culturally that important to me. Similarly, the Inuit, formerly known as Eskimos, but we don't call them Eskimos anymore. Their word for themselves is Inuit. They live in Canada, parts of the USA. Well, they live in this polar Arctic kind of environment where, of course, it's very cold and there's a lot of snow. Therefore, they have a lot of words in their language about snow, different kinds of snow, different amount of wetness in the snow, how the snow falls, the shape of the snow, right? Again, more words than somebody like me who lives in the Caribbean knows about snow. Now, other people might also have a lot of vocabulary about snow, like people who ski, right? Or thinking about the cows, maybe in Puerto Rico, people who work in the cattle industry have more vocabulary in their language about cows than I do. But again, it is because language reflects the culture of the person who speaks it. Now, this is also why there are some words in other languages that don't have a direct translation in English or Spanish, right? And I'm going to show you some of them because they're a little window into the culture, into things that capture the attention to the people who speak that language. For example, in German language, there is a word Waldingsamkeit, and this means that feeling of being alone in the woods. Now, as a Puerto Rican, maybe you have been to a forest by yourself and you know what that feels like you feel something different when you're alone in the middle of the forest. And you can use Spanish to describe how you're feeling, but we don't have an actual word in Spanish to refer to this feeling. In Italian, the word culaccino refers to the mark that's left on a table by a cold glass. Again, cold glasses anywhere in the world will leave a mark in the table, but only Italians noticed it so much, or it's so important to them culturally, that they have a word for it. In Inuit language, ikswarpok, that feeling of anticipation that leads you to keep looking outside to see if somebody's coming. In Japanese, komorebi, that sunlight that filters through the leaves of a tree. In Indonesian, janus, a joke that you tell so poorly and that is so not funny that you can't help but laugh. Not because it's a good joke, but because it's such a bad joke. In Swedish, mangata, the road-like reflection of the moon on the water. Okay, now, there is another relationship between language and culture that goes in the other direction. And we know this thanks to the work of two very famous linguists, Sapir and Worf. And they created this hypothesis that suggests that the relationship goes in the other way. That, sure, language reflects culture, but also culture can reflect language. What does this mean? To them, the linguistic structure that we have in our brains causes us to look at the world differently, right? For example, if I say that I have a job as a sanitation engineer, that sounds different than saying I'm a janitor. A janitor is a person who cleans other people's usually work, buildings or schools or places of work. And being a janitor is a very important job. You need to have clean spaces for people to be able to work properly and not get sick. But unfortunately, in most languages, a word like janitor is not a word that that makes people respect the job, right? But if I change that and say I'm a sanitation engineer, that sounds more professional, even if the job that I do is the same. but the language that I use is changing how you view something, right? And how you view something is part of culture. Um, Governments use this a lot. For example, they might say, I have a country that's my enemy. We don't have good relationships right now. Things are very tense. And I'm going to do a preventive strike. Before they declare war on me, I'm going to strike or attack them first. A preventive strike sounds great. It sounds like preventive medicine. I'm going to the doctor for a checkup because I get sick. It sounds like a good thing. But a preventive strike is an invasion. If you attack first, you're the one attacking and invading. But it sounds nicer to say, oh, I'm not attacking, I'm just striking preventively. And finally, there is the relationship between language and social relationships. This is something that's studied specifically by a subdiscipline called sociolinguistics. We know that humans vary how we use language depending on the social context of situation in which we are present. For example, you all speak Spanish, I assume, but I bet you don't speak your Spanish exactly the same way all the time. Think about how you use language when you are with your grandparents versus when you are at work in a professional setting versus when you're just hanging out with friends or at a party, right? All these things, all these spaces, all these social spaces shape how we use language. Of course, I'm going to use uh, my fanciest, most complex vocabulary at work. When I'm with my friends, I might use more relaxed language. I might use bad words, which I would never use in front of my boss or my grandparents, right? We all do this. Very, interestingly, we can kind of figure out the social relationship between people if we observe how they use language around each other, right? If I observe each of you talking to somebody, I can maybe say something about the power dynamics between the two of you, right? If you look at this picture, I mean, there's a person standing and everybody else is sitting. Um, if two people are speaking with each other in a very similar way, then that probably means they're close friends, right? We can figure out the emotional closeness based on their gestures, on the words that they use, on the topics that they talk about, right? We can probably guess something, not always, about the people's educational level based on what language they use. We can always figure out something based on how two people talk to each other.